Imagine yourself in a peaceful Czech village, in a cold, dark basement where the walls appear to loom heavy with the weight of unfathomable tragedies. The smell of rot permeates the space, and in the weak light, you can just make out two tiny, hardly childlike bodies huddled inside improvised cages. Their bodies show signs of months of unspeakable agony. They are thin and covered in sores. These were not the events from a horror film. Rather, they were the actual circumstances that law enforcement authorities faced on that fateful day in 2007, when they discovered one of the most upsetting child abuse instances in recent memory. The couple's first child, Klara Maurova, went on to have another daughter, Katarina Maurova. The Maurova family resided in Kurim, a charming village in the Czech Republic, about 120 miles from the capital, Prague, in 1975. The town's citizens lived in a lovely, natural location, but there was also clear progress in the form of accessible, high-quality services, business, education, and other activities. There is little information available regarding the Maurova sisters' early years, but it is known that Klara, a stunning young woman with blue eyes and fair hair, had schizophrenia symptoms from an early age. Those who suffer from this serious mental illness have a loss of reality, which affects their emotions, ideas, and behavior. They may suffer from delusions, hallucinations, and other conditions that cause them to act differently. Many reports suggest that Klara's mind was filled with religious fancies, but no documents show that her ailment was ever diagnosed by a specialist. Katarina soon started talking about these illusions. Sibling rivalry is prevalent, with the younger frequently attempting to imitate the older. Regrettably, Katarina seemed to mimic Klara's psychotic tendencies in addition to her voice and appearance. Together, they produced a feedback loop that strengthened Klara's convictions. Together, they daydreamed of the wonderful things that they would achieve under the direction of divine will. The sisters were able to operate successfully in society in spite of their illusions. They had no major problems finishing their elementary schooling, and Klara went on to study pedagogy at university after graduating from high school. Her life appeared to be going rather well, and at the age of 25, she even fell in love with a man. They didn't mind that Klara was older than she was, and shortly she became pregnant. He married Klara, was a devoted and helpful partner, and did everything in his power to support her. Jakub, their first child, made both of their parents happy. After being pregnant for almost 2 years, Klara gave birth to their second child, Ondrej. Regretfully, after a few years, things started to go wrong in the partnership. It appears that the man's tolerance with Klara's volatile conduct, mood swings, and even hostility was reached, which caused him to quit the family and leave Klara and their 2 small children behind. In spite of this disappointment, Klara never wavered in her devotion to her kids, helping them with their coursework and extracurricular activities like summer camps, school functions, and trips. She was a good mother, but the bitterness and loneliness had a negative effect on her and plunged her into a deep melancholy. Seeing how she was feeling, Klara extended an invitation to Katarina to move in with her, and the kids in the hopes that her younger sister's presence and encouragement would get her through this trying emotional time. At this point, a girl named Anika, who claimed to be 12 years old, entered Klara and Katarina's life, permanently changing the course of their family's destiny. According to some accounts, Anika told Klara that she had fled from a youth care center because she was being mistreated and had nowhere to go when they first met at the university. According to other accounts, Katarina discovered Anika, who claimed to have escaped from a child trafficking network while she was employed at a nearby youth facility. Anika's past has been told in a few different ways, but they all get to the same place. Anika brought chaos into Klara and Katarina's home when she moved in. A girl who appeared to be sent from heaven, but was hiding an almost inconceivable secret, was welcomed into the homes of these 2 falsely pious ladies. Anika was Barbora Skarlová, a 32-year-old adult, not a little child. Barbora's tiny stature and youthful looks gave the impression that she was much younger than her actual age. Barbora used her seeming frailty and abandonment to her advantage, as she skillfully manipulated everyone around her. This made it possible for her to take shelter at a number of homes where the residents were moved by her tragically looking circumstances. In spite of this, there was just one record of a family who had adopted Barbara because they thought she was a defenseless little child. But it wasn't long before she was taken back into the custody of the state's child welfare agency. Her violent actions and erratic demeanor were the reasons behind her return. According to some accounts, the family may have even learned the truth about her true age. Later on, information emerged indicating that Barbara had spent a considerable amount of her life receiving psychiatric treatments and had even been confined to mental health facilities, from which she consistently escaped. The Maurova sisters, who immediately became connected to the ostensibly defenseless youngster, were, of course, unaware of its full tale. After welcoming her into their family, they quickly made the disastrous decision to adopt her. The adoption of the so-called child into the family initially appeared to proceed without a hitch, but Barbara quickly started to feel envious of the loving care Klara's biological children were receiving. She began acting naughtily, causing disruptions and difficulty, and she put the blame on the boys, ages 8 and 10. In response, the boys started receiving unjustified reprimands. These stressful circumstances undoubtedly made the mental instability of the Maurova sisters worse. Barbara seems to have used shrewd persuasion to take control of the women and begin imposing her will. At this point, Barbara, who had just moved here, started talking about the Grail movement, the religion she followed. According to our research, the Grail movement is a millenarian apocalyptic religious movement that aims for a complete transformation of society through a fundamental shift. The teachings have been interpreted by followers, who are grouped into groups known as circles. These interpretations are always predicated on the idea that doing good deeds on earth ensures admission into heaven. It also seems possible, though, that members' good activities could atone for any crimes they may have committed. Barbara was a member of one of these groups, and she was able to get Katarina and Klara into it. Several reports claim that this specific gang engaged in cannibalism as well as acts of violence, abuse, promiscuity, and incestuous relationships. The protagonist of this tale was a man known as the Doctor, who used text messaging to interact with his followers and provide them with instructions that were frequently nearly unthinkable. Klara pulled her son Ondrej from school, claiming he had grown deaf and mute, and promised to homeschool him. This was one of the first concerning acts that seemed to go unnoticed. Any mischief from then on, actual or invented by Barbara, was met with severe punishment. Ondrej and Jakub started to get beatings that were far out of proportion to the transgressions, whether they were imagined or not. They were beaten with wooden spoons, belts, or hands. Worse, they were imprisoned at night in tiny, dimly lit rooms. Using her increased power over Barbara, she suggested an even more heinous suggestion. She insisted that the kids needed to be placed in permanent confinement in order to cure their misbehavior, which she claimed had grown uncontrollable. Unaware of the planned use of the cage, a local blacksmith was called in to create one. The youngsters were kept in the practically nude iron cage, which was delivered and put in the house's basement. The next few months were a living nightmare for Klara's sons. The lads endured unspeakable suffering after following the doctor's text message instructions. Among the mistreatment were pinched, whipped, and kept without nourishment for several days. They had no choice but to relieve themselves within the cage and sleep on the filth because they were unable to escape. The three ladies would pour buckets of cold water over the kids and the entire basement once a week while feigning to clean the foul-smelling place. But that wasn't the end of their misery. The lads were once led to cabins that were concealed in a neighboring woodland and placed in tiny cages. Other Grail movement members got together during this time and horribly abused the kids for a week. They were brutally suffocated with plastic bags, or had their heads repeatedly dunked in buckets of water until they were almost unconscious. They were made to dig what they thought were their own graves, beat, and forced to fight each other. Their skin was scarred by cigarettes. They were frequently subjected to sexual abuse, had their lips taped shut, and were frequently kept hand and foot tied. Amazingly, things got worse when they went back to their confinement in the family home's basement. Barbara came up with a strategy to begin feeding the boys a lot while they were in the cage in an attempt to put on weight. The three women entered the cage one day, and Klara requested her younger son to stick out a leg through the bars. The frightened child obeyed, and Katarina and Barbara grabbed his leg as soon as possible, while Klara quickly sliced him with a sharp object. They laughed maniacally and divided the flesh between them. This nightmare, which would have made a good horror film, lasted from December 2006 until mid-2007, or roughly 6 months. In those months, Barbara came up with yet another genius idea. They bought baby monitors and set one up in the basement so the mothers could watch over the kids' every action as well as their agony whenever one of them went down to torture them while the others took care of housework. They had no idea that this amazing notion would almost miraculously bring them to their knees. On May 10, 2007, the Maurova sisters' neighbor was setting up a baby monitor in his house to watch his infant as he slept. He turned on the monitor after adjusting the camera to make sure everything was operating as it should. He was horrified to see, instead of his baby's cot, a dimly lit room with a young child, his arms bound behind his back, stumbling to use his lips to pick up food from the floor. The boy was trying very hard to eat something, but at one point the screen also showed the hand of an adult woman clutching something. The child's state was evident from the picture, since only a thin layer of skin covered his bones. The neighbor reported the startling event to the authorities right away after being terrified by what he observed. Officers saw the horrifying photos for themselves when they got to his house a short while later. The equipment's range indicated that the source of this terror had to be pretty close. With a mission to put an immediate stop to this misery, the officers knocked on every neighbor's door. Upon arriving at the residence of the Maurova sisters, the initial occupants complied with their request to be shown around every room. Although they were hesitant to let the cops in at first, they were ultimately unable to stop them. The officers discovered a locked little door beneath a stairway while conducting their inspection. The cops stayed on the site and summoned for firefighters, who forced open the door. They could not have imagined what they discovered within. They entered the room and were immediately overcome by an awful stink that filled the whole place. When the authorities arrived, they were met by a terrified girl holding a teddy bear and crying that their adoptive mother and aunt had injured her and her brothers, while the others watched in disbelief as two lads, virtually naked and covered with wounds, were placed in cages like animals. One officer led the girl outside. It looked like one of the lads was unconscious. The lads were liberated right away, and emergency personnel took care of them, giving them first aid and hurrying them to a hospital for treatment. The girl was also brought into prison by the authorities, despite not seeming to have been physically hurt. Katarina and Klara were taken into custody. Jakub was transferred to a child safety facility after his wounds were treated, although none of them needed to be hospitalized. Ondrej, the younger boy, was very ill, nevertheless. He had a panic episode and started screaming when he got to the hospital and discovered he wasn't in the basement anymore. He asked the physicians to take his life, saying he was seeing ghosts. There was nothing more sad about the scenario. The physicians were astounded by what they saw on the boy's physique once he had calmed down. He had numerous bruises, open wounds, and scars all over him. One particularly enormous wound was on his buttocks. In order to get the right care, he had to stay in the hospital. The trauma they had endured from months of horrifying torture at the hands of their mother, aunt, and other people would be far more difficult to recover from even as the physical wounds on their bodies healed. Investigations started to reveal the truth about what had actually occurred in that house's interior and in the lives of its occupants behind closed doors. The kids who were put in care centers also became the subject of experts' research at the same time. There are accounts that characterize Barbara's demeanor as exceedingly challenging, even hostile, given that everyone still believes her to be Anika. The purportedly young child behaved aggressively and defiantly, refusing to comply with doctors and counselors. She did, however, start making errors that suggested the truth. For example, when she was first assessed mentally, she was given paper and crayons to draw anything she wanted. Rather than creating simplistic illustrations, she generated intricate geometric designs and sophisticated mathematical computations that beyond the typical expectations of a 13-year-old. Regretfully, Anika's research was never finished. She left no trace as she fled through a window a few days after being placed in the center. Security personnel started looking for the girl right once, even handing out brochures with her picture and information. They were shocked to learn that they would soon be getting suggestions from people who said they knew who the lady in the picture was. A 33-year-old named Barbara, they said. Barbara seems to have benefited from assistance from a well-known couple who gave her their son's immigration documents. She first went to Denmark and then on to Oslo, Norway. Barbara changed her look once more when she went to Norway. This time, she shaved her head and pretended to be Adam, a 13-year-old boy. She went to the police and said she was running from her violent father. According to a number of accounts, Adam was adopted by a family and enrolled in a school where he quickly gained recognition as a talented student. For several months, this deception persisted, but the Czech authorities persisted and eventually put the puzzle together with the help of foreign partners. Barbara was eventually apprehended after DNA testing revealed her genuine identity. After that, she was extradited back to the Czech Republic to face legal proceedings. After her return, Barbara was assessed psychologically in a number of ways. At least one expert who dealt with her reportedly noticed indications of psychotic tendencies. Among the most startling revelations was the rumored fact that a worried schoolteacher was the reason behind Barbara's imprisonment in Norway. Barbara had drawn a picture of 7 bruised and bleeding children, each with a number, and identified herself as the 7th, which had worried the teacher when she was posing as Adam. Hundreds of reporters and television crews surrounding the Brno Municipal Court on Friday, May 9, 2008, taking pictures of Barbora and Katarina being led inside. The two ladies were accused of tricking the personnel of a daycare center by pretending that Barbora was an adopted 13-year-old called Anika. They were not released even though the court apparently dismissed part of the charges. They were taken into custody right away and accused of major crimes including child abuse. 4 other members of the group they belonged to were also included in the charges. Visibly distraught and shrunken, Klara was spotted approaching the courtroom with her sister as the trial got underway. Along with 3 other people, Barbora also made her way into the courtroom. When Klara's turn came to testify, she confessed to abusing her kids over a period of several months. She asserted, nonetheless, that Barbora and her sister Katarina had tricked her. Klara claimed they had put her into a delusional condition, engulfing her in the cult of the Grail movement to the extent that she was unable to recognize the seriousness of what she was doing. Barbora reportedly stated that she had suffered abuse at the hands of the Maurova sisters, according to reports. But the court mostly disregarded her assertions, and few people found her credible. Jakub and Ondrej personally gave the judge a chance to hear their account of the horrifying experiences they went through. They explained how the accused had violated their privacy, forced them to live in abhorrent conditions, nearly starved for months, and even cannibalized pieces of their bodies. The officers who had entered the House of Horrors gave testimony as well throughout the proceedings. One of the officers described how they saw a youngster lying on the floor, naked, as soon as they entered the basement. He reported that Anika, the girl, attempted to obstruct the officers' progress by hanging to their legs, and that the Maurova sisters showed little regard for the child's health. The case prosecutor concluded the hearings by claiming that the accused religious aims were the driving force behind these heinous deeds, which were done in order to subjugate the youngsters. The court stated during his sentencing that the ultimate intention of the horrific deeds detailed throughout the trial was to produce a person with a totally broken will. The judge underlined that the acts were intended to purposefully destroy the soul of a child, noting that although there were hints of a cult's involvement, there was no hard proof to back up this assertion. In the end, the court made his ruling, finding all 6 defendants guilty and imposing their appropriate punishments. The boy's mother, Klara Maurova, received a 9-year sentence to be served in a high-security facility. Katarina, her sister, received a 10-year sentence to be served in a maximum security facility. The other 3 people received a 7-year prison sentence after being convicted guilty of abuse. At last, Barbora, who was 34 years old at the time, was found guilty of severe cruelty and repeated mistreatment and was given a meager 5-year prison sentence. It would never be possible to verify the presence of the so-called doctor who was allegedly leading the group's activities. Some were shocked by the remarkably light penalties meted out for the heinous acts committed by those who perpetrated the most horrific forms of violence against 2 innocent youngsters. Additionally, we discovered accounts that stated Barbora was only able to serve half of her sentence before being freed on parole. Put differently, she was released from prison after just over 2.5 years and went back to living on the streets. Her attorney contended that she was released early because of a marked decline in her mental state. With the aid of specialist care, Jakub and Ondrej were able to get over the severe trauma they suffered as a result of the horrifying crimes they witnessed and have gone on with their lives. That being said, it is certain that those experiences will never truly leave their memories. Avoid missing out. For more exciting investigations, subscribe now.